Support Name Explain on Patreon for ad-free videos, exclusive podcasts and blog posts, and to help choose what names get explained. Click the link in the description. Unfortunately, not every name can be rainbows and sunshines. Many parts of the world have less than pleasant, negative, sad names put upon them for a variety of reasons. Take the likes of Mistake Lake in Canada, Crying Child Island in the US, and even Cape Disappointment also in the USA. Like I said, they aren't the nicest of names. Today, however, I want to focus on just one rather sad name on our planet, and the sad story as to why it has this name, with that being the sad name of Poverty Bay. While we link the word poverty mainly with the amount of money one possesses these days, initially the word could be used to describe a lack of anything, and I guess it could still be used in that sense today. It came into the English language via the French pauvre, which came from the Latin word for poor, pauper, and pauper into itself is a word we still use today to describe a very poor person. So this Latin adjective not only helped create the English noun of poverty, but it was also directly lifted to create the English noun of pauper too. And from the name, I'm sure you can guess that Poverty Bay resides somewhere where the primary language is English. It is not here in the UK, however, or somewhere in the USA or Canada, but Poverty Bay is in fact in the Pacific island nation of New Zealand. And despite the sad name and the sad history behind it, modern Poverty Bay doesn't seem like that sad of a place. Poverty Bay resides on the east coast of New Zealand's North Island. I haven't been there myself, but from what the images I can see of it, it looks incredibly picturesque with sights of natural beauty, both of the water and the surrounding green. The largest settlement of Poverty Bay is the city of Gisborne, which touts itself as the first city on the planet to greet the sun each morning due to its location. So why is this coastal bay in this beautiful Pacific island nation got such a sad, negative name? Well, it all stems from the history that has taken place in this part of the world. It's yet another tale of European conquest at the expense of the natives and the disregard of their land. It was at this bay, which would eventually become Poverty Bay, where James Cook first landed in New Zealand and would eventually claim it for the British Crown, all the way back in 1769. I'm sure you've heard of James Cook. He was a captain in the British Royal Navy, as well as a cartographer, explorer, and navigator. He joined the Navy as just a teenager but rose through the ranks. He even mapped out Newfoundland in Canada, so when it came to exploring more of the southern hemisphere for the British Crown, he was a natural choice to lead the expedition. Cook was chosen to lead an expedition to the southern hemisphere in 1768, with the intention of the journey being to observe the transit of the planet Venus on the already discovered island of Tahiti. Well, that was the reason for the expedition given to the public anyway. Despite how linked James Cook is with this part of the world and how often he's branded its discoverer, New Zealand was already known about by the Europeans. Most noticeably, in 1642, Dutch explorer Abel Tasman sighted it on one of his journeys, which explains why the nation has the name of New Zealand, as Old Zealand is in the Netherlands, as we've talked about many times already. So when Cook and his crew left Plymouth on his ship HMS Endeavour, they had some idea as to what to expect down there, hence why Cook was also handed a secret envelope he was only allowed to open and read once he made it there, with the instructions on what to do there, aside from track Venus of course. And of course, as well as New Zealand already being known of to the Europeans, New Zealand wasn't a barren wasteland by any means. The islands were already inhabited by natives. What we seem to know is that before the arrival of Cook, and even before Tasman sighted the land, various tribes were making themselves at home on these islands. Of course, most notably now are the Maori people of New Zealand, but there were tribes before them, it would seem. It seems they arrived in New Zealand in canoes from other Polynesian islands, and even possibly from islands of Melanesia. These early natives would have coexisted with one another. So make no mistake, life in New Zealand was well underway before Europeans even sighted the lands. Anyway, back to Cook and his crew. They left Plymouth in the southwest of England in August of 1768 and wouldn't even reach New Zealand until October 1769. While there was some stops along the way, including one early stop in Madeira, and of course they stopped to track Venus on Tahiti, I'm sure you can imagine that supplies were starting to get rather low on board the Endurance. Basic things like food and water were starting to become an issue. There are conflicting reports into the state of supplies on the ship at this time. Many said there were little of anything. However, one person seemed a little more optimistic, that being naturalist Joseph Banks, who was on board and part of the expedition. He kept an extensive journal of his time in the voyage and luckily wrote about the state of the ship's supplies. He wrote that the beef and pork supplies were good, as well as their supply of flour and oatmeal, and perhaps most importantly, the alcohol kept extremely well. However, he reported that the bread was full of weevils, and the onboard pigs would not eat, and the sheep were starting to show signs of scurvy. So while the beer was still good to drink, the livestock wasn't in the best shape. The sentiment on board was that when they reached land, they'll be able to restock on supplies. And land would finally be sighted on the 7th of October 1769. Cook had promised a reward to whoever first sighted land, and that reward went to a 12-year-old boy in the crow's nest. It was around 2 PM on the 7th the cry of "Land ahoy" was heard. Little is known of the boy who first spotted the land, other than that he was called Nicholas Young, and Cook did give him his reward, with that reward being his name being used in the land. And to this day, Young Nick's Head is still the name used for some headland just south of Poverty Bay, although this headland isn't thought to actually be the land Nick actually spotted. It's not entirely related to Poverty Bay, but an extra etymology fun fact nonetheless. It was on the 8th of October that Cook and his crew dropped anchor in what would become Poverty Bay. Records say that smoke could be seen coming from the land, so they concluded the island was inhabited. This caused suspicion in the crew as they raised the cannons. They made some attempts to get into the land but were driven off by the natives in their canoes, meaning Cook and his men had to stay on board until an opportunity to land was made possible. They kept a sharp watch on board all night in case a nighttime attack from the natives occurred. Of course, the natives would not seen a boat like this so close before, and the stories go that they mistook it for either a bird in the distance or even a floating island. Now that New Zealand was in sight, Cook felt he could read those secret orders he'd been given in England well over a year ago. These instructions told Cook to search for the long hypothesized southern lands that were thought to have been there, and in turn claim these lands for the British Crown. One passage of the secret orders say, "With the consent of the natives take possession of convenient situations in the country in the name of the King of Great Britain," which means Cook was ordered to claim these lands even if there were natives already there, and that they be placed under rule of the British Crown. Not only is this rather shocking, but the content of these secret orders were not made public until the 1920s, around 150 years after the initial orders were placed. While there wasn't one huge mass of land in the southern hemisphere, we all know that what land there is down there was claimed by the British under James Cook. Anyway, Cook and his crew were on board the anchored Endeavour in what would become Poverty Bay. It came time for them to finally actually set foot on the island. Cook and some of his crew took a smaller boat from HMS Endurance onto the mainland. As they reached the shore, some natives appeared. Cook and his crew had the instant reaction to shoot. At first, 2 shots were fired into the air as a warning to the natives. However, when one of the natives started to aim his spear towards their small boat, a bullet immediately met his chest and he fell to the ground dead. This native's name has been given as Etymology, and some believe he was actually the tribe's chief. So Cook and his men weren't even on shore yet, they'd already killed a native chief. The other natives dragged his body to a safe place and retreated, allowing Cook to set foot in New Zealand easily. The next few days bring more sadness to the natives. By the afternoon of the 10th of October, 5 more natives had been killed by Cook's men. They were shot for various reasons. One was supposedly stealing from them, while the others were killed just because they resisted being molested. Other natives who weren't killed were taken captive by the English, and even in the afternoon of the 10th, Cook ordered for more natives rowing away from them in a canoe to be shot at. Cook's hope was that shooting over them would cause them to panic, but as they took up arms in the boat, Cook ordered for them to be taken care of too. Cook even wrote of his regret in this instance, saying, "I can by no means justify my conduct in attacking and killing the people in this boat." It was also thought that on this day, the 10th of October 1769, that James Cook formally declared New Zealand as part of the British Empire. However, there seems to be counter-arguments about that too. Though, after his initial exploration in the east of the North Island and killing many natives, Cook set off once again on the 12th of October to navigate around the rest of New Zealand, mapping it out, claiming it all for Britain, and I even read that in future interactions with natives, Cook and his men were far more friendly. Regardless though, Cook made a truly unpleasant first impression in New Zealand. The needless killing of natives still divides his image in the nation to this day. And of course, he also let his thoughts on this part of the island be heard in the name he left on that first bay his ship sailed into, and when he first set foot in the nation, as it was Cook himself that gave the bay the name of Poverty Bay. So why did he name it this? That's the whole point of this video anyway. Initially, Cook wanted to name whichever bay he first landed in Endurance Bay, in honour of his ship HMS Endurance. However, by the time it came to leaving this bay on the 12th of October, Cook had a different idea as to what to name it. As I mentioned earlier in this video, by the time they reached New Zealand, food supplies had started to dwindle. The hope was that when they arrived in New Zealand, they'd be able to restock from the natural resources they found there. However, the bay in which they landed in proved to have have very little in the way of usable resources for them, which Cook and his crew saw as a huge inconvenience. The lack of use Cook saw in the land made him not name it Endurance Bay, but instead he chose a different name. As he wrote in his journal, at 6 AM we weighed and stood out of the bay, which I have named Poverty Bay because it afforded us no one thing we wanted. Poverty can mean more than just lack of money, it can mean lack of anything, and as Cook felt that this bay had a lack of natural resources for him and his men to take from the natives, he branded it with that sad name. Now, forgive me if I'm going a bit too high school English teacher here, but I really feel that this less than stellar name really shows us just how little care Cook had initially for this land. His hope for this land would be somewhere fruitful, full of resources for him and his men to plunder, and any natives that got in their way were dealt with swiftly. However, this land was fruitless to him, leading him to be unhappy and brandishing it with the unpleasant name of Poverty Bay. In my eyes, this is nothing but unnecessary death and complete disregard and lack of respect for land that isn't yours. He literally strolled in, killed a bunch of people, then deemed the land useless, branding it with that sad negative name of Poverty Bay. Like I said, he really didn't make the best first impression. However, that was about 250 years ago. Things have changed a lot. Both the British and New Zealanders look back at Cook's time on the land in a different light. Real change really came about in 2019 when the British High Commissioner to New Zealand, Laura Clark, released a statement expressing modern Britain's regret. She said, "What is clear is that your ancestors were shot and killed by the crew of the Endeavour and others were wounded. That was greatly regretted by the crew of the Endeavour at the time and is regretted here today. It is deeply sad that the first encounter happened in a way that it did, and to you, as the descendants of those killed, I offer my every sympathy, for I understand the pain does not diminish with time." And things have even changed on the naming front, somewhat. Like many other sites across the world, the native name for this bay has been restored. The Maori called the bay Taranganui Akiwa, and now that name is too reflected in the bay's official name of Taranganui Akiwa / Poverty Bay, with the Maori name meaning the long-standing place of Kiwa, who was a Maori chief in the area. So while things may be looking more positive in the naming side of things, the sad events that took place here and the disregard and murder that took place here by the British is still present in that sad name of Poverty Bay. Negative place names were suggested by James Burton, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saint of negative place names. Do you have a good idea for somewhere that name could be covered in a Name Explain video? If so, then please consider donating on Patreon. Just $1 a month helps keep the channel running and earns you a weekly chance to suggest somewhere to be turned into a video, and you too could be a Name Explain Patreon saint. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Patreon is vital to Name Explain, and donating just $2 a month allows you to enjoy ad-free videos and bonus Patreon exclusive content. It also allows you to help choose what names get explained in upcoming videos, and it gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you so much for all the support you guys give Name Explain. Hello all, and thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Check out another video and subscribe to stay in the loop on all things Name Explain. You can find me on Twitter, I'm at NameExplainYT. On Instagram, I'm also NameExplainYT, and on Facebook, just search Name Explain. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.